So I'm not going to mince words. The video I'm covering is very much on the older side. However, it annoyed me. It's a video where somebody talks about how much they hate modern art, and it comes off as incredibly elitist. Take this clip as an example. The context is this person is discussing how you became an artist during the Renaissance.
Becoming an artist was not something anybody could do. In some years, you needed to become the apprentice of an already established, well-known artist. In others, you had to attend an academy, learning all the rules of art, such as light, shadow, proportion, perspective, sculpturalism, etc. Simply put, it was a difficult endeavor.
I imagine you can see where this is going. They go on to talk about modern art and how easy it is to make.
However, modernism emerged in the 20th century.
19th, not 20th, with the first piece of what we would currently call modern art appearing in the 1860s.
Unlike old Renaissance styles such as Baroque,
which wasn't from the Renaissance. The beginning of the end of the Renaissance was the fall of Rome in 1527, and it was essentially over all across Europe by the end of the 16th century. Meanwhile, Baroque started in Italy in the later part of the 16th century, but didn't really take off until the 18th century, long after the Renaissance had ended.
Rococo,
which was also from the 18th century.
Neoclassicism,
which was from the late 18th century until about the mid-19th century.
Among others, with modernism came styles such as Cubism, Futurism, and Abstract Expressionism.
Okay, I'm left with a question I commonly have when I find videos like this. What do you mean by modern? Are you using it in the sense that scholars use it to refer to art from the 1860s to the 1970s? Because if so, then why did you mention the 20th century as the beginning of modern art earlier in the video? If you mean more that you are just referring to contemporary art, then why did you name drop Futurism? A style which fell out of fashion following World War I, and hasn't really had much relevance in the art world for over a century at this point. And while I'm on this topic, you later call modern art the movement of art from Paris to New York.
It was the shift of art from Paris to New York.
Which makes me wonder why you decided to mention an art movement that was essentially exclusive to Italy.
And unlike the art of before, many of these modernist styles were easy. So easy that anyone with some paint and a brush could do it. Heck, as Jackson Pollock proved with action painting, sometimes you didn't even need the brush.
You name-dropped Cubism, which, in the form it was pioneered in, was specifically famous for how difficult it was to create. Similarly, I reject the notion that abstract expressionism, especially the kind you mention as being done by Pollock, is easy to create. Pollock had to undergo quite a bit of experimentation and work in order to make his art, whether that be in the form of just trying to perfect his craft, or figuring out how to deal with coil instability. Pollock's paintings might seem easy to create, but that's not true. Creating them involves years of experimenting, innovating, and expressing oneself. They reflect his turbulent life, inner struggles, and artistic vision. These paintings aren't just pictures, they're actions, writes the website artstrology.com. It wasn't uncommon for Pollock to spend weeks painting after spending weeks contemplating where his art was going to go. This is not easy art by any stretch of the imagination, and anybody who claims otherwise has no idea how it was made. I also want to take a moment to discuss this part where they mention how much one of Pollock's paintings sold for.
Let's turn back to Jackson Pollock's number 5 for a second. How much do you think this one is worth? 5 million? 10 million?
Now, I didn't know the answer when I first watched this video, however, I immediately knew those estimates were quite a bit on the low side, not just because I knew the rhetorical point being made, but also because Pollock is one of the most famous artists in human history, and quite possibly the most famous one of the 20th century. And we're talking about his most famous painting, so obviously it's going to sell for quite a lot of money.
In 2006, this piece was sold for an absurd $140 million. That's as much as an expensive yacht, or two cheaper ones.
And what exactly is absurd about that? Again, we're talking about one of the most famous paintings by one of the most famous artists in human history, and quite possibly the most famous painting by the most famous artist of the 20th century. Fuck, that's not even the most a Pollock painting has ever gone for. That would go to Pollock's number 17A, which was purchased for what would be $230 million in today's money, although it was only $200 million in 2015. And this is just after she notes that the Mark Rothko painting sold for $1.8 million, while also saying it is simplistic.
What I dislike is that these artworks are being sold for absurdly high amounts of money. Mark Rothko's number 16 sold for $1.8 million. Not too bad yet, right? That matches the price of many other paintings, though few of which are as simplistic as this.
When, first off, similar to the aforementioned Pollock painting, Rothko is famous, so obviously his art is going to sell for more because of the inherent prestige of having a Rothko painting as opposed to a painting from just some random person. But second off, I reject the notion that Rothko's art is simplistic. There's a great article on Medium called The Rothko Effect, which goes into this, that I will now quote from. Its perception of simplicity is deceptive. You think, I could do that, or my child could do better. And while not wanting to diminish the hard artistic efforts of any children, when you do try to recreate the painting, it doesn't come out quite right. The colors don't work quite the same. There is a depth missing, because there are invisible details in the original that you can't see or replicate, and you suddenly find it is not as simple as you first perceived. The article goes on to read, "What we don't see is what is happening underneath the water. All of that mass represents the mistakes, the testing, experience, the parts of the process that have informed and shaped the final outcome. Without this unseen work, what happens at the top wouldn't be quite so impressive. We think we see the reality of something as easy and simple, but we are missing the hidden work that has gone into producing it. In the same way we see the works of Rothko, the finished painting doesn't tell you that Rothko left his Yale degree and went to New York so he could study under a professor more experienced in his area of interest, or that he developed his work as part of a collective of artists. And at the time, they were using experiences coming out of Europe as a new way of looking at what art meant to him. Practicing his skill took time and dedication. Only his experience could produce those works. In the same way, only your experience and skill set can produce your work." And, you know, after hearing all the hard work both Pollock and Rothko put into their creations, I think it's understandable I take umbrage with this statement.
Randomly splashing paint around on a large canvas isn't a particularly difficult thing to do. Nor are random swashes of paint in solid chunks, like in Mark Rothko's number 16.
Now, first off, you can make anything sound easy when you boil it down to that simplistic of a level. I could just as easily say that insert good artist here isn't all that skilled because all they do is make lines. However, that's not where the talent of this work comes from. Pollock and Rothko were unique because of what they did with these very easy things to do. And none of this is even getting into the key issue with saying these prices are absurd. Value is inherently subjective. You may think that $1.8 million is a ridiculous amount of money to spend on a Mark Rothko painting. And by the way, I am not even saying I personally agree or disagree with that sentiment. I have said I don't think you've made a case for that, But that's entirely unrelated. However, somebody clearly thought the painting was worth $1.8 million. Hence why they purchased the painting for $1.8 million. And you know what? That is perfectly fine. I may not think that's the wisest use of $1.8 million. However, at the end of the day, I'm not the one who decides how that person spends their money. And this is why I called you an elitist earlier in the commentary, by the way. Well, okay, it's one of a couple of reasons. Because your entire argument is essentially based on the idea that this art is not worth what the person who bought it thinks it's worth. Your entire argument boils down to somebody's subjective opinion being factually and objectively incorrect. But I simply ask, who are you to decide that?
And herein lies my problem with modernism. Because it's been commoditized by the wealthy, all the same, like with the paintings of the past. It's a shame that, despite the accessibility initially touted by the art form, modern art has become something only enjoyed by the rich, once again. We see pieces such as Pollock's No. 5, Rothko's No. 16, or Picasso's painting of a lover in a beret, being traded around by private collectors for millions of dollars.
Okay, a couple of things. First off, what you're describing are the exceptions and not the rules. You listed incredibly famous artists, and I know I keep going back to this, but obviously the works of famous artists are going to be quite expensive. However, the point of the movement was never to decommodify art. I just don't know where you got that from. If it were, then people like Pollock would have just given their art away for free as opposed to selling it. Instead, the point was to make it so art was entirely focused on self-expression. The fact that the art was later commodified is a good thing, as it means there's an economic incentive for such art to exist in the first place. And let's really talk about the narrative you're attempting to push here. You're essentially arguing the problem with modern art, as you put it, is that abstract expressionism is being commodified. People are becoming incredibly wealthy based off of the works they made that were nothing but, again, pure self-expression. Now, I'll ignore the fact that isn't even close to the truth, as I feel like I've already hammered that in enough. Instead, I want to ask, if that is true, how exactly is that a problem? And that is what truly angers me about this video. It's not the fact that it's wrong, it's the fact that if it were right, that would be a much better reality.
The legacy of modern art is, dare I say, tarnished in recent years, replaced with the idea of it being the work of lazy artists randomly splattering paint on a canvas to earn a quick buck. And again, looking at these absurd prices being fetched, it's no wonder it earned this reputation.
Quite the slow, quick buck, given this is not only decades after the art was originally created, but also decades after the artists themselves died. It's already been established the Pollock purchase occurred in 2006. Meanwhile, the Picasso painting was sold in 2018. Given both Pollock and Picasso have been dead since 1956 and 1973 respectively, it seems quite bizarre somebody would look at these purchases done decades after they were no longer alive and use them to determine modern art is just a means of making a quick buck. Anyway, that's all I want to cover, so final thoughts. This video had a lot of factual issues, and it doesn't even really make a case for why what it's describing is bad. And that's really what bothers me about it. Good night, and good luck.